The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today I rise in support of my amendment which prohibits the BLM from finalizing its draft Rock Springs Resource Management Plan, the purpose of which is to severely restrict livestock grazing, mining, energy development, recreation, and other activities on 3.6 million acres of land in southwestern Wyoming. The BLM is required to update its resource management plans approximately every 10 years. The Rock Springs Field Office began the process of updating its own plan in 2011 in accordance with FLPMA. The proposed RMP contains 4 alternatives for the planning area, including Alternative A, which keeps the current management plan in place, the BLM's preferred Alternative B, which would have tremendous negative consequences for Wyoming and the nation as a whole, Alternative C, which severely restricts recreational activities, and Alternative D, which provides better balance between various uses, but still substantially impacts the activities of key contributors to Wyoming's economy, such as our trona mining and existing oil and gas operations. Contrary to the very purpose of the BLM, it has chosen the most restrictive, the most draconian, and the least scientifically defensible plan, the one that Wyomingites are the most opposed to, as its preference that being Alternative B. In total, under BLM preferred Alternative B, about 2.5 million acres would not be available for new rights-of-way. This would be an increase of more than 480% in acreage off limits to important things like power lines, pipelines, and maintaining roads. The draft RMP restricts the use of vehicles on millions of acres of land, restricts recreation, cuts livestock grazing, destroys our trona industry, and severely restricts our ability to explore for and produce oil, gas, and coal. BLM's Alternative B is a non-starter. It will have severe impacts on the economy of not only Wyoming, but the nation. It will impact our food supply. It is for these reasons I have introduced my amendment to defund the BLM's efforts to finalize or implement Alternative B. I encourage the RMP as a whole. I encourage my colleagues to support this important amendment, and with that I reserve.
Gentlelady reserves. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Chair, I claim time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Chair, the Republicans' Interior Appropriations Bill attacks our environment and the opportunity for prosperity in communities that have historically been left behind. This bill stands in stark contrast to Democratic values and priorities. Last Congress, the Democratic House, Senate, and President recognized that for too long, rural communities have lost jobs, people, and economic vibrancy. As someone from and representing rural communities, changing this trajectory is my purpose and my passion in Congress. It's also my duty to bring rural voices to this chamber, especially at times when Republicans' extreme bills will hurt our precious rural communities. I know many of my colleagues in this room are also concerned about the rural communities where they live. Yet, rather than investing in places of promise, Republicans are using their appropriation bills to undermine that promise. Indeed, their Interior Environment Bill cuts programs from the Inflation Reduction Act, our landmark law that we passed last year that marked the largest climate investment in U.S. history. They want to cut that act by $9.4 billion. This includes slashing the EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund by $7.8 billion. That fund allows us to address the climate crisis while investing in jobs and capital improvements in rural America and other communities across the country that have been left behind. This program is an opportunity to remedy decades of underinvestment and to protect our beautiful lands, our beautiful environment for generations. I hear my Republican colleagues talk a lot about energy independence, yet they attack the programs that would actually help us achieve energy independence, true energy independence, not relying on foreign oil in Russia and others who would control prices that we pay at home. But we also know that pollution especially hurts the same communities that we fail to invest in. Communities that are often places where Latinos and other people of color live. Does this bill of theirs attack that pollution? Nope. Instead, it cuts $1.4 billion needed to address environmental health impacts. It tells those communities that they're not a priority. It tells them that we're not going to make things right for their health or for the environment. What's worse is that this bill cuts funding for the environmental agencies and council that work to protect our environment and public health, because health is directly tied to environmental pollution. Last Congress, Democrats made historic investments in rural America's infrastructure, the most investments since the New Deal and the Rural Electrification Program. In contrast, the extreme interior bill, Republicans would roll back all that progress. We can't face the climate crisis on a 1991 EPA budget, which is what this bill would do. 1991? Really? For these reasons, at the appropriate time, I will offer a motion to recommit this bill back to committee. If the House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with an important amendment to this bill. My amendment would strike the 4 provisions of the bill that cut programs for the Inflation Reduction Act, including the $7.8 billion cuts from EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It would also cut $1.4 billion to the environmental and climate justice grants. I would make sure that those were not cut. All remaining funding from the Council on Environmental Quality for environmental and climate data collection and efficient and effective. And all remaining funding for the National Park System for deferred maintenance. We know our parks need the care that they deserve. They are America's promise, and we are ignoring them and letting them deteriorate. At the end of the debate, I will insert into the record the text of this amendment. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting for the motion to recommit, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. For what purpose? Or the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you. None of the response from my colleague on the other side had anything to do with the amendment before us, so I'm just simply going to proceed with the statistics related to this particular RMP. The RMP severely restricts vehicle access, including 4,500 miles of routes to all uses, while removing an additional 10,000 miles of routes from the transportation network. This draft RMP designates 1.8 million acres out of 3.6 million acres as areas of critical environmental concern without any congressional input whatsoever. Perhaps what's most disheartening and disturbing and illegal about this RMP is the fact that it's ignored not only stakeholder input over the past 12 years, but the input and analysis undertaken and completed by the BLM personnel in the Rock Springs District's office. The administration has proven time and again that its primary agenda is to push forward with the radical Green New Deal, as we just heard from my colleague on the other side, and that it views the opinions of unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. over the citizens of this country, and that it does not care whether its actions actually work in the real world or cause severe damage. In addition to the fact that Alternative B is just plain bad on its face, it was also adopted in violation of FLTMA and NEPA. According to a former BLM engineer who worked in the Rock Springs field office on this very RMP, most of the research and work went into studying and pursuing Alternative D. What does that mean? The most controversial alternative, the alternative that the BLM is now seeking to impose on Wyoming, was never adequately evaluated. Alternative C, which includes heavy recreational restrictions, also had little time and little review. The lack of planning and analysis and input related to Alternative B exposes the fact that this is a political decision that is not based on the real-life situation in the Rock Springs District, but more related to the idea of blocking any access to our natural resources for the things that we have historically used them for. I would encourage my colleagues to support this amendment, and with that, I reserve.
The question, gentlelady has the only time remaining.
Okay. We have historically balanced our energy development, land use, recreation, wildlife management, and grazing, and we have done it well. Come to Wyoming. It is a beautiful state. We have been able to balance all of these interests and in the process become the largest producer of trona in the United States, raised hundreds of thousands of head of cattle and sheep, and produced massive amounts of coal and oil and gas to power this country, all the while protecting our habitat, our air quality, our water quality, and our very way of life. I am proud of Wyoming producers, ranchers, and recreationists and what they have created, and we cannot allow BLM to destroy it. It was said the other day by a reporter that this BLM RMP takes the public off public lands. I couldn't have said it better. Mr. Chairman, we've seen this kind of thing happen across the interior West, including with the Bears Ears designation in Utah and others in Colorado and Arizona. We need to put a stop to this effort to block our access, use, and management of our resources. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, which would prevent any funds from going towards implementing this monstrosity of a plan. And with that, I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Wyoming. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.